There are few dynamics as exhausting as the one between the person who gives endlessly and the person who withdraws when things get too close. For empaths, it can feel confusing, painful, and strangely magnetic all at once. The very heart that longs to heal and connect finds itself chasing after someone who seems to be running the opposite direction. And for avoidance, pulling back can feel safer than letting anyone get too close. This creates a loop where the empath is always reaching forward and the avoidant is always pulling away. It is a cycle that drains the empath and reinforces the avoidance distance. Today we're going to explore why this happens, how the cycle repeats, and what it means for anyone who has ever found themselves endlessly chasing after connection that never seems to stay. Chapter 1. The nature of the empath's chase. The chase begins in the most innocent of ways. It does not come from weakness or desperation or a lack of self-respect. It comes from care, deep, genuine, wholehearted care. Empaths are wired to feel what others cannot always say out loud. They notice the subtle changes, the shifts in tone, the pauses that feel heavier than usual. They pick up on silence as though it were a language all its own. And when they sense that something is off, their first instinct is not to retreat, but to reach in. For an empath, distance feels unnatural. Silence feels like a wound that must be tended. If something feels unsettled, they feel it inside themselves as though it were their own imbalance. Imagine a song that suddenly cuts off mid-note, leaving you aching for resolution. That is how an empath feels when someone close to them withdraws. They cannot rest until they try to close the gap, until they bring harmony back to where dissonance now exists. When an avoidant pulls away, the empath does not see it as a signal to step back. They see it as a call to lean forward. It is as though a magnetic pull tugs them closer, urging them to fill the silence with words, to soothe the tension with reassurance, to keep the connection alive with effort. They are not chasing because they crave control. They are chasing because the distance feels unbearable and because they believe their care can soften what has hardened. In their mind, they are patching cracks before they spread wider. They are holding together pieces that seem to be slipping apart. They are stepping in not because they want to overwhelm, but because they want to save what matters. And so, the chase begins with good intentions. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, it shifts. The avoidant steps back. The empath steps forward. The avoidant grows quieter. The empath grows louder. The more the avoidant withdraws, the more the empath feels compelled to give, to fix, to restore balance. And before long, the empath is not just giving care. They are running in circles, chasing after closeness that never seems to stay. The experience is draining because no matter how much the empath offers, the distance does not truly close. It feels like trying to hold water in the palm of your hand. The tighter you try to hold it, the faster it slips through your fingers. And the empath cannot understand why. They are pouring in compassion, patience, and understanding, yet the space remains. The silence remains. The wall remains. What is most painful is that the empath begins to turn the chase inward. Instead of seeing it as a cycle that belongs to both people, they take full responsibility. They start to believe that if they just tried harder, waited longer, or gave more, then maybe the wall would finally crumble. They convince themselves that their role is to be the glue that holds everything together. And in doing so, they forget something important. Closeness cannot be forced. For an empath, this realization comes slowly, often after much exhaustion. They start to notice how heavy it feels to keep running. They notice how drained they become when their efforts are not met. They notice the quiet loneliness of being the only one reaching, and even though they may not admit it right away, deep inside, they start to question whether the chase is about connection at all, or whether it has simply become a pattern that repeats itself over and over again. And so, the chase is not a flaw of the empath. It is the expression of their deepest strength, their ability to care, to heal, to hold together what feels fragile. But when this strength is misdirected toward someone who cannot or will not meet them halfway, it becomes a cycle that depletes them. It becomes the loop of reaching for something that will not stay, and in the process, forgetting that they deserve to rest, to be still, and to be met without running at all. Chapter 2. The Pull of the Avoidant Dynamic. To understand why the cycle between empaths and avoidants feels so unshakable, we have to look closely at the way both roles feed into each other. The avoidant is someone who values space, who feels safest when there is a comfortable distance. They may not always say it out loud, but when connection begins to feel too close or too vulnerable, their instinct is to pull back. For them, stepping away feels like regaining balance. The empath, on the other hand, interprets that same distance in the exact opposite way. Where the avoidant feels relief, the empath feels alarm. Where the avoidant feels safe in space, the empath feels abandoned in silence. And so, two people can look at the same moment, the same pause, the same step backward, and interpret it in completely different ways. One feels peace, the other feels panic. This is where the pull of the dynamic begins. The avoidant withdraws not always out of cruelty, but out of habit, self-protection, or comfort. The empath rushes in not out of neediness, but out of genuine care and discomfort with disconnection. Both roles are doing what feels natural to them, but when they meet in this pattern, it becomes like two gears that keep spinning in opposite directions, locking each other into place. For the empath, the avoidance distance feels like a puzzle to solve. It sparks the thought, what did I miss? What did I do wrong? How can I bring them back closer? For the avoidant, the empath's approach feels overwhelming, like too much closeness too fast. And so, without realizing it, both end up reinforcing the very behaviors that keep the cycle alive. The more the empath pursues, the more the avoidant retreats. The more the avoidant retreats, the more the empath pursues. The pull of this cycle is strong because it speaks directly to what each side fears. The avoidant fears being swallowed up or losing their sense of control. The empath fears being left behind or losing their sense of belonging. And in trying to protect themselves from those fears, both end up creating the very thing they are afraid of. The avoidant, by withdrawing, fuels the empath's sense of rejection. The empath, by chasing, fuels the avoidant's sense of overwhelm. The truth is that this dynamic is not about villains or victims. It is not about good or bad people. It is about patterns that repeat themselves because they feel familiar, even when they are painful. For the empath, stepping into the role of the pursuer can feel instinctive, almost second nature. For the avoidant, stepping into the role of the distancer feels just as natural. Neither role is consciously chosen in the moment. Both are automatic responses. For empaths, this cycle can be especially draining because it plays on their deepest qualities, their patience, their compassion, their willingness to try harder, qualities that are beautiful in many contexts, become the very fuel that keeps the loop spinning. Instead of pulling back to protect themselves, they lean in even further. And what happens? The avoidant pulls away again. The pull of this dynamic teaches a subtle but powerful lesson. Not every silence is meant to be filled. Not every distance is meant to be closed. And not every withdrawal is a signal for pursuit. Sometimes stepping back is not a rejection, but simply a reality of how another person navigates closeness. The challenge for the empath is recognizing when their instinct to chase is not healing the gap, but widening it. And perhaps the hardest part to accept is this: no amount of chasing can create closeness where someone is determined to maintain distance. No amount of patience can pull someone forward who does not want to step closer. For the empath, realizing this truth can feel heartbreaking, but it can also be the beginning of freedom. Because once they see the cycle for what it is, they can begin to step out of it, to reclaim their energy, and to save their care for where it can truly grow. Chapter 3. The silent cost to the empath. What often goes unseen in this cycle is the silent cost carried by the empath. On the outside, it may look like they are managing, that they are endlessly resilient, that they always find the energy to keep trying. But beneath the surface, the toll of constantly reaching out, constantly repairing, constantly stretching themselves to hold something together is heavier than it appears. Every time the avoidant steps back, the empath feels a pull inside. It is not just the sting of distance, it is the weight of questioning themselves. They wonder if they are too much, if their care is overwhelming, if their kindness is somehow wrong. These questions chip away at their sense of worth in small, quiet ways. And while one moment of doubt might be easy to brush aside, repeated moments build over time until they become a narrative the empath begins to carry. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe my care is a burden. This is the cost that is rarely spoken about. It is not only the exhaustion of trying to hold a connection together, but also the erosion of self-confidence that comes from repeatedly feeling unseen or misunderstood. The empath starts to silence their needs because they believe expressing them will only push the avoidant further away. They shrink their voice not because they want to be silent, but because they feel they must be in order to keep the peace. And so the cycle becomes more than just a pattern between two people. It becomes an inner battle for the empath. They begin to trade pieces of themselves for the hope of closeness. They quiet their thoughts, soften their boundaries, and sometimes even lose sight of their own identity. The very qualities that once made them feel alive, empathy, attentiveness, openness, begin to feel like weights when they are not reciprocated. The cost is also felt in the way empaths absorb the atmosphere around them. When the avoidant withdraws, it is not just the absence of words or actions that hurts. It is the emotional silence, the sense of being left alone with unanswered questions. Empaths feel deeply, and so they carry not only their own emotions, but often the unspoken emotions of the people around them. In a dynamic where someone pulls away, the empath is left holding both the weight of their own sadness and the unacknowledged feelings of the other person. It is a double burden, one that leaves them depleted in ways that are difficult to put into words. And yet, the most painful part of this cost is how invisible it often is. Empaths rarely announce how much they are struggling. They put on a brave face, they keep showing up, they keep giving, and from the outside, it can look as though they are handling everything with ease. But inside, they may feel like they are quietly unraveling. The silence of their suffering only deepens the sense of loneliness. They are carrying so much, yet it feels as if no one sees the depth of their weight. The cost is also cumulative. It builds over time, slowly, almost unnoticed. What starts as small compromises can eventually lead to a point where the empath no longer recognizes themselves. They look back and realize they have given so much that they have little left for their own needs, their own dreams, their own peace. And when that realization comes, it often feels like a deep grief, because they see how much of themselves they have lost in the process of always trying to keep the connection alive. Chapter 4. The Loop That Never Ends. When you look closely at the connection between an empath and an avoidant, what stands out most is not just the push and pull, but the way it repeats over and over. It becomes a loop, a pattern that feels familiar, predictable, and yet almost impossible to break. The empath reaches out, the avoidant steps back, the empath feels hurt and questions themselves. Then they try again, and once more the avoidant retreats. Around and around it goes, each time reinforcing the same dynamic. The difficulty with this loop is that it can feel like progress is being made, even when it is not. An avoidant may occasionally return just enough to give the empath hope, and in that moment, the empath feels relief. They believe their effort worked, that their patience was worth it, that maybe this time things will be different. But soon after, the withdrawal happens again, and the cycle resets. It is like walking in circles in a dense forest, thinking you are moving forward, only to realize you keep ending up in the same place. For the empath, this cycle is exhausting. Each return of the avoidant reignites their optimism, but each withdrawal reignites their self-doubt. The loop is not just a pattern of behavior between two people. It becomes an emotional roller coaster inside the empath, where hope and disappointment trade places so often that it becomes difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. The loop also thrives on silence. Because empaths tend to internalize their pain, they may not voice how much they're struggling. And because avoidants tend to retreat rather than explain, there is often very little real communication happening. This silence allows assumptions, fears, and insecurities to fill the space. The empath imagines reasons for the distance, often blaming themselves, while the avoidant maintains their comfort in withdrawal. The lack of honest dialogue keeps the cycle alive, unchallenged, and unbroken. What makes this loop even harder to escape is the emotional investment the empath pours into it. Every time they reach out, they invest hope. Every time they stay patient, they invest belief. Every time they give more of themselves, they invest energy. Over time, these investments feel too heavy to walk away from, even when the returns are small. The empath thinks, "I've given so much already. I can't stop now." And so they stay, repeating the loop, because leaving feels like losing all they have poured in. The loop is not only about actions, but about identities. Empaths often define themselves by their ability to help, to heal, to care deeply. When faced with avoidance, they see an opportunity to prove that their empathy can make a difference. They step further into the role of the giver, thinking that if they just love enough, listen enough, or wait long enough, things will change. But in reality, this only strengthens the cycle. The more they give, the more the avoidant pulls away, and the more the empath feels compelled to give again. Breaking this loop is not easy because it requires the empath to do something that feels unnatural to them, to stop chasing, to stop fixing, to stop pouring endlessly into a space that does not pour back. It requires them to sit with discomfort, to face silence without rushing to fill it, and to honor their own needs even when someone else does not. This is not something that comes quickly, because it goes against the patterns they have carried for so long, but recognizing the loop is the first step. Naming it, seeing it for what it is, removes its power to remain hidden. The truth is, the loop continues as long as both roles remain unchallenged. The avoidant remains comfortable in withdrawal, and the empath remains committed to reaching out. It is only when the empath chooses to step out of their role, to pause their reaching, to reclaim their energy, that the cycle begins to weaken. This choice does not mean they care less. It means they are learning to care for themselves as much as they care for others. Chapter 5. Breaking Free and Choosing Yourself. Breaking free from the loop is not about one dramatic moment. It is about a series of small choices, each one building on the last. For an empath caught in this cycle with an avoidant, the most important choice is deciding to stop feeding the loop. This is not an easy decision. It comes with fear, uncertainty, and the weight of letting go. But it is also a choice that carries the possibility of peace. The first step is recognizing that the loop is not a reflection of failure. It is not proof that the empath is too much, too sensitive, or too giving. It is proof of a pattern, a dynamic that has been reinforced over time. When this is understood, it is easier to see that stepping away is not abandonment. It is self-preservation. It is an act of courage to say no to a dynamic that drains your spirit. Choosing yourself means allowing yourself to be vulnerable in a different way. It means letting yourself acknowledge the pain without rushing to soothe it through action for someone else. It means turning the care inward, giving yourself permission to rest, to speak your truth, and to honor your own needs. This is the work of breaking free, not as a single act, but as a process of continual self-choice. This process is not without its challenges. Old patterns have a way of pulling you back in. The desire to help, to fix, to mend is deeply ingrained. The silence of the avoidant can still call to the empath's sense of responsibility. But each time you choose to step away, each time you choose yourself, the loop loses another piece of its power. The breaking point becomes closer, and the cycle begins to dissolve. When the loop is broken, what emerges is not only freedom, but clarity. The empath begins to see themselves without the weight of the cycle. They discover the value of their own boundaries and the strength in saying no. They understand that their worth is not tied to another person's approval or response. They reclaim their energy and their voice. Choosing yourself does not mean the pain disappears. The memories of the cycle and the feelings it stirred will remain. But there is a difference. Those memories become lessons, not chains. The pain becomes part of the growth, a reminder of the importance of self-awareness, self-respect, and self-compassion. The greatest gift an empath can give themselves is permission to stop chasing, to stop bending into someone else's rhythm and instead create their own. To stop waiting for someone who may never meet them where they need to be, and instead stand firmly in the truth of their own presence. This is the ending of the loop and the beginning of a different way of living, a way that honors both empathy and self-care, a way that keeps compassion but protects the heart, a way where the empath finally comes first, not out of selfishness, but out of self-preservation and self-love.